He tapped the microphone twice. 400 people went quiet, and then he pulled his mistress forward right there on stage and said 5 words that would destroy his entire life. "This is the real lady of this house." His wife was sitting at table 12, the back of the room, near the exit, like she did not even belong there. His mother was clapping, his brother was laughing, his sister was recording it for social media. 400 people watched that woman get erased from her own life in real time. But here is what nobody in that room knew yet. Not his mother, not his mistress, not his lawyers. Not a single one of those 400 guests. That same afternoon, at exactly 4:47 p.m., while her husband was rehearsing his little speech and his mistress was getting her hair done, that woman sitting quietly at table 12 had just signed the largest private oil deal in 20 years. $16 billion. Her name, her land, her grandmother's legacy, and she had told no one. She sat there with that contract in her purse, watching her husband give away her seat at the table, knowing that in approximately 4 minutes, a man was going to walk through those back doors and change every single thing that room believed was true. What happened next silenced 400 people at once. And I mean silenced. Not a whisper, not a breath. 400 people who had opinions 2 minutes ago and suddenly had none. This is that story. And trust me, you are going to want to hear every second of it. Value statement and lesson. Before we begin, here is why this story matters. This is not just drama. This is a reminder that the quietest woman in the room is usually the most dangerous one. It is a story about what happens when you build your future on your own name, your own paper, your own terms, and you let the world catch up to you instead of chasing it for permission. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or replaced by someone who did not build what you built, this story is for you. If that opening already gave you chills, you are in the right place. This channel is built for stories like this, stories about women who were counted out and came back with receipts. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it? I read every single comment. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, share it with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time changes everything. Now, let us begin.
He tapped the microphone twice, smiled at 400 people, pulled his mistress forward by the hand, and said 5 words that he would spend the rest of his life regretting. This is the real lady of this house. His wife did not stand, did not speak, did not allow a single muscle in her face to shift into anything that would give anyone in that room the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply reached into her purse, slowly, with the calm of a woman who had already decided how the story ended, and touched the contract that owned everything he had and about 200 things he did not know existed yet. But before we get to that moment, and believe me, it is worth waiting for, you need to understand something about the woman sitting at table 12, the one in the back of the room, the one seated near the exit, close enough to say she was invited, far enough to say she did not matter. That woman had been preparing for this exact night for 731 days. She had not made a single mistake, not one. Well, that is not entirely true. She made one mistake. She married him, but she fixed that too. And here's something worth remembering before we even start this story, because Claire learned it the hard way, and it might save you someday. Never build your empire on someone else's land. If your name is not on the paper, you do not own it. It does not matter how much love went into building it. Love is not a legal document. Remember that. Write it down if you have to. Now, let us go back. Let us go back 20 years to a small town outside Knoxville, Tennessee, where the roads turned dusty in the summer heat and the screen doors never quite closed all the way. Back to a modest house with a wide front porch and a kitchen that always smelled like something good was either just finished or about to begin. Back to a wooden table under a single hanging lamp where a young woman sat studying long after everyone else in the house had gone to sleep. Her name was Claire Calloway. She was 19 years old and bright-eyed in the way that people are bright-eyed when they have not yet learned how many things in this world are specifically designed to dim them. She was studying everything she could get her hands on: engineering textbooks borrowed from the community college library, business journals left behind by customers at the diner where she worked the morning shift, finance articles she printed for free at the public library on Saturdays and read at the gas station where she worked the night shift. Claire did not come from money. Her father had left before she could remember his face. Her mother worked double shifts at a textile factory until her back gave out, and after that, she worked single shifts at a textile factory with a back that never stopped hurting. There was no college fund. There was no safety net. There was no plan B. But Claire came from something better than money. She came from a woman named Josephine Calloway. Everyone called her Nana Jo. Nana Jo had spent her entire working life waiting tables at a diner called Patsy's on Route 11. 40 years of carrying plates that were too hot, smiling at people who did not always smile back, and collecting tips that most people would have considered an insult. She did all of it with a kind of dignity that could not be bought or borrowed or faked. The kind of dignity that comes from deciding who you are before the world gets a chance to tell you. She was sharp in the way that women get sharp when the world does not offer them shortcuts. She spoke like someone who had read every book ever written, even though the world had tried hard to keep those books out of her hands. And she had opinions about everything, especially about Claire's future, which she considered to be her personal responsibility and greatest investment. One night in September, when the air had just started to cool and the crickets were louder than the television, Nana Jo sat down beside Claire at that kitchen table and slid a thin envelope across the wood. It was not thick. It was not impressive looking. But what it represented was 22 years of a woman choosing her granddaughter over comfort, choosing the future over the present, choosing one girl's possibility over every easier thing she could have done with those dollars. "This is everything I saved," Nana Jo said. Her voice was low and steady, the way her voice always was when she was saying something she had thought about for a long time. 22 years of tips. Every dollar I did not spend on myself, and I want you to use it to buy something that nobody can take from you. Not a man, not a family, not a company. Something with your name on a piece of paper, a legal piece of paper. Do you understand what I am telling you? Claire nodded. She understood, or she thought she did. She would understand it more completely later, in ways that would break her heart and then rebuild it. Then Nana Jo reached down and unfastened the thin gold bracelet from her own wrist. It was worn smooth from decades of wear, the kind of piece that was not valuable because of what it was made of, but because of who wore it, and why, and for how long. She fastened it around Claire's wrist with careful fingers and looked at her granddaughter with the fullness of everything she had ever wanted to say, concentrated into a single moment. "When the world tries to tell you who you are," Nana Jo said, "you look at this and remember who told you first." Then she slid a second, smaller envelope across the table, and her expression shifted into something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. "That one is for a decent pair of shoes," she said. "You cannot walk into a boardroom wearing those things you have been wearing. I have seen better footwear on a scarecrow." Claire laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from being loved by someone who sees exactly who you are and is not interested in pretending otherwise. She would carry that laugh and that bracelet and those words into every room she ever entered for the rest of her life. And 20 years later, sitting at table 12 in a ballroom full of 400 people who had just been told she did not matter, she would touch that bracelet one more time and prove Nana Joe right about everything. Claire used Nana Joe's money to enroll at the University of Tennessee, petroleum engineering. It was not the program anyone expected a waitress's granddaughter from rural Appalachia to choose, but Claire had read an article about Gulf oil leases in a magazine left behind at Patsy's Diner, and something in her brain had clicked into place like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for exactly that key. She worked full-time throughout college. Mornings at the campus bookstore, evenings at a gas station off the highway, weekends at a catering company where she served food at events hosted by people who would, years later, take her phone calls on the first ring. She graduated in 4 years, not because she was naturally gifted, although she was, because she could not afford a 5th year. Necessity is a teacher that does not give extensions. After graduation, she took an entry-level position at a small energy consulting firm in Houston. 3 years of being the youngest person in every meeting, the least connected person at every mixer, and the most prepared person in every room. She read every geological survey that crossed her desk, like other people read novels, staying up until midnight with highlighters and coffee, looking for patterns that other analysts were too busy or too comfortable to notice. It was at an industry mixer in her 2nd year that she met Frank Calloway. No relation, despite the shared last name, which became the first thing they laughed about and the foundation of a friendship that would last decades. Frank was 52 then, semi-retired, a petroleum attorney with 40 years of experience and a reputation for being the quietest and most dangerous man in any negotiation room he entered. He noticed Claire that evening because she was the only person at the event who had actually read the geological survey report that everyone else was pretending to understand while holding glasses of wine that cost more than Claire's monthly rent. He walked over to her, introduced himself, and said, "You actually read the Henderson report, did you not?" Claire looked up. Every page, the formation data on Section 7 does not match their production estimates. They are either incompetent or lying, and based on their quarterly filings, I think it is both. Frank stared at her for a long moment, then sat down beside her, and that was the beginning of the most important professional relationship of Claire's life. He became her mentor. Not the kind of mentor who makes speeches and gives vague encouragement. The kind who picks up the phone at 7 in the morning and says, "I will be there by Thursday." By 28, Claire had built a network of contacts in Gulf Energy that would later become the foundation of everything. She knew the geologists. She knew the attorneys. She knew the landmen and the roughnecks and the pipeline engineers. She knew who was honest and who was not. And more importantly, she knew which category was more useful in which situation. Then she met Jack Ashworth at an industry conference in Houston, and for a while, everything she had built became someone else's story. Jack was 39, handsome in the way that expensive suits make average men handsome, broad-shouldered, confident smile, the kind of man who held eye contact 1 second too long and made you think it meant something profound, when really it was just a technique he had practiced. He told her on the second night, sitting at the hotel bar with his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened in a way that was meant to look casual but was actually calculated, "You are the smartest woman I have ever met, and honestly, that intimidates the hell out of me. Here's a tip, and this one is free. When a man tells you that your intelligence intimidates him, pay very close attention to what he does next. Because what he is actually telling you is that he has already figured out how to use it." Claire did not know that yet. She would. They married after a year. Small ceremony. Claire wanted it simple. Jack's mother, Victoria, wanted it not to happen at all. But when it became clear that Jack was going forward with or without her blessing, Victoria attended in a cream-colored suit and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and she began planning something that would take 3 years to complete. The early years of the marriage were genuinely good. That is important to say because what came later does not erase what came before, and Claire would not want it to. They built Ashworth Energy Consulting together from Jack's garage in Atlanta. Literally, a garage. A folding table, 2 laptops, a coffee maker that only worked when you hit it at exactly the right angle, and more ambition than the space could hold. Claire brought everything that mattered: the clients, the technical knowledge, the credibility, the contacts she had spent a decade building, one handshake and one late night and one perfectly prepared report at a time. Her name opened doors that Jack's charm alone never could have. Jack brought the handshake, the smile, the ability to walk into a room and make every person in it feel like they were his closest friend and most important priority. He was good at that, genuinely good. It was the one skill he had that was entirely his own. She was the architect. He was the front door. For a while, the arrangement worked. Late nights at the kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, coffee going cold and neither of them noticing, planning the next pitch, reviewing contracts, building something together the way she had once built something alone at Nana Joe's kitchen table. It felt like partnership. It felt like proof that love and ambition could live in the same house without one of them having to leave. But here's the thing about arrangements, where one person is the foundation and the other person is the face. The face gets the credit. The face gets the handshakes and the magazine profiles and the invitations to events where important people gather to congratulate each other. And slowly, gradually, the way fog moves in before you realize you cannot see anymore, the foundation gets forgotten. Year 3. Jack stopped inviting Claire to client dinners. Said it was just easier if he went alone. Said the clients preferred a more relaxed atmosphere. Said she could use the evening to rest. She noticed, but she said nothing because she was building something and she did not want to be the kind of wife who counted invitations. Year 5. The company website was redesigned. Claire's name was removed from the About page. Jack said it was a formatting issue. The web designer made a mistake. It would be fixed next week. Next week became next month became never. Year 7. Victoria started attending family holidays and Christmas dinners with a new kind of energy, a purpose that Claire could feel but could not quite name yet. Comments delivered with a smile that made them almost impossible to challenge without sounding paranoid. Claire, honey, is it not time you focused on the home? Jack is doing so well now. He really does not need you hovering around the office. A man needs room to grow. Year 8. Claire sat down one evening and looked at the company she had helped build from a garage. Every client relationship she had originated, every deal structure she had designed, every contact she had shared, and she realized something that hit her like cold water. Her name was on nothing, not the articles of incorporation, not the partnership agreement, not the client contracts, not the bank accounts. She had built the entire thing, and legally she owned exactly none of it. She had broken Nana Joe's one rule. She had built her empire on someone else's land. And here's the second piece of advice woven into this story. And this one is not free. Claire paid for it with years of her life. So the least we can do is learn from it. If you are building something with someone, anyone, a husband, a business partner, a friend, get your name on the paperwork on day 1, not day 2. Not when things get serious, not when you feel like the relationship is solid enough to ask. Day 1. Because love does not survive a courtroom, but a contract does. Claire learned that lesson sitting at a kitchen table in Atlanta 8 years into a marriage that was about to show her its real face. To understand what happened to Claire, you could not just look at Jack. Jack was weak. Jack was the instrument. The hand that held the instrument belonged to his mother, and Victoria Ashworth had been composing this particular piece of music for longer than Claire had been married to her son. Victoria came from old Atlanta money, not the kind that shows up on magazine covers or gets profiled in the newspaper. The kind that owns the buildings. The quiet kind. The kind that whispers instead of shouts, because it does not need to shout. Her family had been in Georgia for 4 generations, and she had married into the Ashworth name and spent 40 years polishing it with the dedication of a woman who believed that family reputation was not inherited, but maintained. Like silver or furniture, or the story you told the neighbors about why your youngest son dropped out of college. Claire Calloway, a waitress's granddaughter from rural Tennessee who showed up to her first Ashworth family dinner in shoes that Victoria could identify as discount brand from across the room, was never going to be acceptable. Victoria did not say this out loud, because women like Victoria never say the important things out loud. They simply arrange the world until it reflects their preferences, and then they act surprised when people notice. Victoria's campaign to remove Claire from her son's life was not a burst of emotion or a moment of jealousy. It was a 3-year operation, executed with the patience and precision of someone who understood that the most effective changes are the ones that happen so slowly that no one can point to the exact moment they began. Year 1 was about isolation. Victoria hosted family gatherings and forgot to tell Claire the updated time. Easter brunch moved from 11 to 9:30, and nobody thought to call Claire until the photos had already been taken. Thanksgiving seating was rearranged so that Claire ended up at the far end of the table, then at a separate table, and finally, in what Claire's best friend Darla would later describe as the most disrespectful thing she had ever heard in her life, at the children's table. Literally. Between a 7-year-old with a juice box and a 9-year-old who kept flicking mashed potatoes at the dog. When Claire told Darla about it later, over wine at Claire's apartment, Darla set her glass down with the careful precision of a woman who is trying very hard not to yell. Hold on. Stop. Back up. Your mother-in-law put you at the kids' table. Like, with the coloring sheets and the sippy cups. There were not sippy cups, but there was mac and cheese. Claire paused. Yes, Claire, baby. I love you like a sister, but if my mother-in-law put me at a table with a bunch of first graders and a dog, I would have flipped that table so fast the cranberry sauce would have hit the ceiling fan and taken out the chandelier on the way down. That would not solve anything, Darla. No, but it would have been fun. And sometimes, Claire, sometimes fun is the whole point. Darla was loud where Claire was quiet, impulsive where Claire was strategic, and completely incapable of letting an insult go unanswered for more than approximately 4 seconds. She was a nurse at Emory University Hospital, which meant she had spent her career taking care of people who were going through the worst days of their lives, and she had exactly 0 patience for people who made other people's lives worse on purpose. She was also the only person in Claire's life who said exactly what she was thinking at the exact moment she thought it, which was either her greatest quality or her most dangerous one, depending on the situation. Claire needed her. She did not always know how much, but she did. Year 2 of Victoria's plan was about replacement. Tom Ashworth, Jack's younger brother, brought a woman named Megan Cross to a company networking event. Megan was 30 at the time, polished, well-connected, with a degree from Vanderbilt and a consulting background in energy finance. She was attractive in the way that certain women are attractive, not because of any single feature, but because of the overall impression of someone who has been carefully assembled for a specific purpose. Victoria personally ensured that Megan was seated next to Jack at the dinner. She introduced them herself, and she watched the introduction the way a gardener watches a seed she has just planted, knowing that it would take time, but confident in the soil. Year 3 was active replacement. Victoria helped Megan secure a consulting contract with Ashworth Energy. Patty, Jack's sister, took Megan shopping for company events, helped her pick dresses, introduced her to the social circle that gathered around the Ashworth name like satellites around a planet. Tom gave Jack the keys to an apartment downtown that he described as a crash pad for late work nights, which is the kind of description that only works on people who are choosing not to ask follow-up questions. The family did not just accept what was happening, they facilitated it. They coordinated it. They funded it. This was not a husband who lost his way. This was an organized removal. They did not just want Jack to be with Megan. They wanted Claire gone, erased, replaced so completely that even the memory of her contribution to everything the Ashworths had would disappear right along with her. And Claire, sitting in her office late one Tuesday evening, reviewing a quarterly filing that was supposed to be routine, finally saw the proof written in black ink on white paper in a language she understood better than anyone in that family ever would. Claire did not discover her husband's affair through a lipstick stain or a midnight text message or a friend pulling her aside at a party with that look on their face that says, "I have to tell you something." She discovered it through a business filing, because that is the kind of woman Claire was. She lived in the language of documents and data, and the betrayal found her there, in her own language, like a letter written specifically so she would understand exactly what had been done. She was reviewing quarterly filings for Ashworth Energy, the company she had helped build from a folding table in a garage, when she found a subsidiary she had originally structured 2 years earlier. Her framework, her legal architecture, her contacts used to fund it. Her name had been removed. Megan Cross had been added as managing partner. Claire read it 3 times, not because she did not understand it the first time. She understood it immediately. She read it 3 times because she wanted to make sure that what she was feeling was based on fact and not suspicion. Because Claire had learned a long time ago that the difference between those two things is the difference between power and helplessness. She did not confront Jack immediately. She never did anything immediately. That was not who she was. Instead, she opened a small notebook, the kind you can buy at any drugstore for $2, and she wrote down the date, the filing number, the exact changes that had been made, and the name Megan Cross. She underlined it once, then closed the notebook and put it in her nightstand drawer. Over the next 3 weeks, she watched. She listened. She noted the late nights that did not match the work Jack said he was doing. Business trips that appeared on his calendar after she had already heard about them from other people. A second phone tucked beneath a folded jacket in the back of the closet, its screen lighting up in the dark at 2 in the morning with a name she now recognized. She wrote everything down. Dates, times, inconsistencies. The way a woman writes things down when she knows the truth but understands that feelings alone are not evidence. And evidence is what you need when the world is structured to believe the man in the expensive suit over the woman who helped him buy it. Then, on a Sunday morning, over breakfast, with no raised voice and no tears and no accusations, she placed a copy of the filing on the kitchen table in front of Jack and asked him to explain it. Jack picked it up, read it, set it back down, and said, without flinching, without even the courtesy of looking uncomfortable, that Megan was just a business associate, that the filing was a technicality, that Claire was being paranoid. "You have always been too suspicious, Claire," he said. "You really might want to work on that." He said it the way a person says something when they have already decided that the other person's feelings are a character flaw rather than a reasonable response to being lied to. That same evening, Victoria called, uninvited, unprompted, as if she had been waiting by the phone for exactly this moment, which, knowing Victoria, she probably had. "Some women hold on too tight," Gloria said, her voice smooth and practiced, "and then they wonder why their husbands pull away. Maybe if you spent less time at the office and more time being a wife, Jack would not have to find his peace somewhere else." Claire said nothing. She let the silence sit on the line for 10 full seconds. Then she hung up, opened her notebook, and wrote down the date, the time, and Victoria's exact words. She was not collecting grievances. She was collecting evidence. There is a difference. Grievances are what you carry when you have no plan. Evidence is what you carry when you do. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire drove home from a meeting in downtown Atlanta, turned into her own driveway, walked through her own front door, and entered her own kitchen to find Megan Cross sitting at her table, not standing in the doorway, not in the driveway, at her table, sitting in her chair, drinking from a mug that Claire's own hands had bought at a shop on Peachtree Street 3 Christmases ago. Victoria was across from her, chatting in the relaxed, comfortable tone of a woman who felt entirely at home in someone else's house, as if this had already been decided, as if the transfer of ownership had already occurred and Claire simply had not received the paperwork yet. Jack walked in from the hallway behind Claire a minute later. He looked at his wife standing in the doorway of her own kitchen. He looked at the woman sitting at her table, and he said, without apology, without shame, without any recognition of what this moment actually was, "I have been meaning to talk to you. I think it is time we had an honest conversation about our future." An honest conversation, as if anything about this scene involved honesty. Claire looked at him, looked at Megan, looked at Victoria, who held her gaze without blinking, with the serene confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. Then Claire turned and walked back out the front door. She got in her car. She sat in the driveway. She did not turn the engine on. The sun went down. The streetlights came on. The houses around her lit up one by one with the warm glow of families eating dinner and watching television and living ordinary lives that did not include sitting in a dark car, wondering how everything you built ended up belonging to someone else. She did not cry until the 3rd hour, and she cried the way strong women cry, alone, completely without witnesses, and with the understanding that by morning she would need to be finished with it. She cried for Jack, not the man sitting in that kitchen with another woman, the man she had believed in at a conference in Houston when she was 30 years old and the world still felt wide open. She cried for the late nights and the shared coffee and the pitch meetings they had prepared for together and the version of herself that had genuinely believed that building something together meant it belonged to both of them equally. She grieved all of it, right there in that driveway. Every year, every contact she had shared freely, every piece of her expertise she had poured into a company that carried his name on the door because she had decided that love meant giving without keeping score. And then she was done. Because here's the thing about Claire Calloway Ashworth. She had been Nana Joe's granddaughter for 39 years, and Nana Joe's granddaughters did not break in ways that could not be rebuilt. They broke and then they got up. And when they got up different. The next morning, at 7 a.m., Claire made one phone call. "Frank, I am ready." Frank Calloway picked up on the second ring. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how she was doing. He simply said, in the calm and certain voice of a man who had been waiting for this exact call for 2 years, "I will be in Atlanta by Thursday." That was the thing about Frank. He did not waste words. He did not waste time. And he had known, long before Claire had, that this phone call was coming. 2 years earlier, Claire had brought Frank a geological survey. It had been conducted quietly by a firm she had hired with her own money on a small piece of coastal property near the Gulf of Mexico. The property was held in a trust that Nana Joe had established decades ago, a small parcel of land that nobody in the family had ever thought much about. Nana Joe had bought it for almost nothing in the 1970s, a piece of Gulf Coast dirt that most people would have driven past without a second glance. But Claire was not most people. She had spent 15 years reading geological surveys the way other people read the morning news, and when she looked at the data on that piece of land, something clicked. She hired the survey. She paid for it herself. She told no one. The results came back and confirmed what she suspected. Beneath that small, overlooked piece of Nana Joe's land sat an oil reserve that was not small. It was not modest. It was not a nice little bonus. It was massive. Industry reshaping. The kind of discovery that changes what a name is worth in every room it enters from that point forward. Claire had sat with that survey in Frank's office in Houston, and Frank had looked at it, then looked at her, and then set it down on his desk with the careful deliberation of a man who understood exactly what he was holding. "Here's what we are going to do," Frank had said. "We are going to build the legal framework first. Every protection, every firewall, every structure that ensures this belongs to you and only you. We are going to line up investors quietly. We are going to prepare the acquisition documents, and we are going to wait." "Wait for what?" Claire had asked. "For you to be ready to pull the trigger," Frank said. "Because once this becomes public, everything in your life changes. Your marriage, your business, your name, everything. And I need you to be ready for all of it. Not most of it, all of it." For 2 years, they had built, quietly, precisely, legal structures designed by Frank with 40 years of experience in petroleum law. Corporate entities established in Claire's name alone, traced back through the trust to Nana Joe's original purchase, airtight and unassailable. Investment partnerships cultivated with careful, quiet conversations, including one with Richard Hale, one of the most respected oil industry investors in the American Southeast. Richard had reviewed the survey data. He had visited the site. He had sat across from Claire in a conference room and asked her questions for 3 straight hours, the kind of questions that only someone who had been in the industry for decades would think to ask. And Claire had answered every single one without hesitating. At the end of the meeting, Richard had leaned back in his chair and said, "Miss Calloway, I have been in this business for 40 years. I have seen a lot of deals and a lot of people. You are the real thing. When this is ready, you call me." Now it was ready. Claire was ready. And the timing, which she had not planned, but which the universe seemed to have arranged with a kind of poetic precision that Nana Joe would have appreciated, meant that the deal would close on the same day that her husband planned to publicly erase her from his life. She did not know about the dinner yet when she called Frank that morning. She did not know about the microphone, or the gold dress, or the 400 guests. She would learn about it later that week, when Patty accidentally mentioned it within earshot, and she would add it to her plan, not as a reason to change the timeline, but as a reason to keep it exactly where it was. Some chapters need to be closed with witnesses, and 400 would be enough. Frank arrived in Atlanta on Thursday, exactly as promised. He walked into the conference room of the law firm he had retained on Claire's behalf, set his briefcase on the table, and laid out the final steps. The acquisition would be called the Meridian Gulf Project. The land rights traced directly from Nana Joe's trust to Claire, clean and unbroken. The geological data had been verified by 3 independent firms. The reserve estimates had been confirmed. The investor commitments were locked. The offer on the table was not $100 million. It was not $500 million. The Meridian Gulf oil field, based on confirmed reserve estimates and extraction projections over the next 50 years, was valued at $16 billion. And Claire Calloway was going to sign as the sole private owner. Frank looked at her across the table and said something he rarely said, because Frank rarely said things that were not strictly necessary. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Claire. Claire touched the bracelet on her wrist, the thin gold band, worn smooth from being worn by 2 women across 60 years of living. She did not say anything. She did not need to. But the road to that signing was not smooth. And this is where the story gets hard. 3 weeks before the dinner, Frank secured a preliminary agreement with Gulf Pacific Energy, one of the major players interested in partnering on the extraction rights. The initial terms valued the partnership at $180 million for the first phase alone, with Claire retaining controlling ownership. It was not the full deal. It was the doorway to the full deal. But it was real, and it was solid, and for the first time in months, Claire felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time: relief. She called Darla that evening. She did not tell her the details because she had promised Frank she would tell nobody, and Claire kept her promises, but she allowed herself to say 4 words. I think I am going to be okay. Darla's response came immediately. Define okay. Are we talking, I can afford my own apartment, okay? Or are we talking, I am buying a house with a walk-in closet that has its own zip code, okay? Somewhere in between. Girl, I need a number. My emotional support is directly proportional to the number of zeros involved. I am not being shallow. I am being practical. Claire laughed. The second real laugh she had allowed herself in months. 3 days later, the laugh was gone. Megan Cross showed up at the Gulf Pacific meeting. She arrived as a representative of Ashworth Energy Consulting, carrying a folder of documents that claimed Ashworth Energy had a pre-existing consulting relationship with the same geological survey data that formed the basis of Claire's deal. The documents were fabricated, built from old notes that Claire had left years ago on the Ashworth Energy shared drive, back before she knew what the land was worth, back when she still trusted that the digital spaces she shared with her husband were safe. Megan had found them. She did not fully understand what they meant, but she understood enough to weaponize them. Enough to walk into a conference room full of lawyers and executives and create just enough doubt to freeze the entire deal. Gulf Pacific pulled back. Pending clarification of competing claims, their attorney said, in the careful, non-committal language of lawyers who do not want to be on the wrong side of a dispute they do not fully understand. $180 million. Frozen. In 15 minutes. Claire sat in Frank's office afterward, staring at the wall. 2 years of work. 2 years of building and protecting and waiting, and she walked in with a folder and froze it in 15 minutes. Frank, who had not raised his voice in 30 years of law practice, did not raise it now. He sat across from Claire with his hands folded and said, in the same steady voice he always used. She froze it. She did not kill it. There is a difference. And the difference is what happens next. But before what happened next could happen, the second blow landed. Jack filed for divorce. Not a normal divorce. Not the kind where two adults sit down with their attorneys and divide things with whatever dignity remains. Jack's legal team, funded by Victoria, filed an emergency motion to freeze all of Claire's personal assets, claiming she had been hiding marital property, the Gulf Coast land, and engaging in financial fraud against the marital estate. 3 attorneys, expensive ones, the kind who wore watches that cost more than Claire's car, and spoke in sentences designed to make the person on the other end feel small. The motion was filed on a Monday. By Wednesday, Claire's personal bank accounts were temporarily frozen pending a hearing. She could not access her savings. She could not pay her attorney's retainer. She could not even buy groceries without using cash she had set aside in an envelope in her nightstand, because Claire had learned from Nana Joe that you always keep cash somewhere that does not depend on anyone else's permission to access. And then the third blow, the one that nearly broke her. She received a certified letter at her home address. It informed her that she had been formally removed from the board of Ashworth Energy, the company she had built from nothing. The letter was signed by Jack, by Tom, and by Megan Cross, who was identified in the document as newly appointed Vice President of Strategic Development. Claire's job title, Claire's role, given to the woman who had been sitting in her kitchen chair 3 weeks earlier. 3 catastrophic events in 10 days. The deal frozen, her assets frozen, her position at the company she built given to the woman who was sleeping with her husband. This is what despair looks like when it comes in waves. Not a single blow that knocks you down, but 3 in a row that make you wonder whether getting up is even worth the effort, because there might be a 4th one waiting that you cannot see yet. Claire sat on the floor of her apartment that night, the apartment she had rented after leaving the house, a small 1-bedroom on the east side of Atlanta, with thin walls and a kitchen that smelled like the previous tenant's cooking no matter how many times she cleaned it. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and the gold bracelet on her wrist and the phone in her hand, and she thought about calling Nana Joe, the way she had done 1,000 times before, and then she'd remembered that Nana Joe had been gone for 5 years, and the number did not work anymore, and there was no one on the other end. That was the loneliest moment of her life. And here is where I want to pause and say something directly to whoever is listening to this right now. Because this part of the story is not just about Claire. This is about every person who has ever sat on a floor somewhere at 2 in the morning, wondering if they had made the right choices, wondering if the things they built were ever really theirs, wondering if the people they trusted ever really deserved it. If you have been in that place, then you know something that people who have not been there do not understand. You know that the darkness at 2 a.m. is different from the darkness at 10 p.m. It is heavier. It is more specific. It asks questions that the daytime does not ask, and it does not accept easy answers. But you also know, if you have survived it, that the morning comes anyway. It does not come because you earned it. It comes because that is what mornings do. And sometimes, surviving is just staying on that floor until the light changes, and then standing up because the light changed. And that is enough. Claire stayed on that floor until 4:30 in the morning. Then the light changed, and she stood up. She called Frank at 7 a.m. Again, Frank. They froze my accounts. I know, Frank said. I have been on the phone since 5. What do? We do what we always planned to do. We just do it faster and quieter. The next 72 hours were the most intense of Claire's life. Frank activated every relationship he had built in 40 years of practice. He called in a favor from a federal judge he had worked with in the 1980s. Not to fix the case, Frank did not operate that way, but to expedite the hearing on the asset freeze, arguing that the motion had been filed in bad faith to obstruct a legitimate and independent business transaction. The hearing was moved up by 2 weeks. Frank presented documentation showing that the Gulf Coast property had been in Nana Joe's trust for over 40 years, predating Claire's marriage by decades. The trust had been established, funded, and maintained entirely outside the marital estate. Jack had never contributed a single dollar to it, had never been named in any document related to it, had in fact never even known it existed because Claire had followed Frank's advice and told nobody. The judge reviewed the documents, looked at Jack's attorney, looked back at the documents, and dismissed the freeze within 40 minutes. No ambiguity, no room for appeal on the immediate question. Claire's accounts were unlocked that afternoon, but the Megan problem remained. The fabricated documents she had presented to Gulf Pacific were still creating doubt, and doubt, in business, is almost as effective as proof. It does not matter if the claim is false, if the claim creates enough hesitation to slow things down. Frank had anticipated this. He had not spent 40 years in petroleum law without learning that the most dangerous weapon in any negotiation was not a contract or a lawsuit, but uncertainty. And the only way to defeat uncertainty was with overwhelming, undeniable clarity. He called Richard Hale. "Richard, we need to go direct. Skip Gulf Pacific. We take this to the full market. Open bidding among 3 major firms. Bring them to the table simultaneously and close within 30 days. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a big play, Frank. Claire deserves a big play." The next 3 weeks were a blur of conference calls, due diligence meetings, legal reviews, and the kind of precise, relentless work that only happens when the people involved understand that the window is narrow and the stakes are everything. Claire sat in every meeting. She answered every question. She knew the geological data better than the geologists. She knew the extraction projections better than the engineers. She knew the legal framework better than anyone in the room except Frank. And even Frank occasionally looked at her with an expression that said he was learning things he had not known. 3 firms bid. The final offer came from a consortium led by Continental Gulf Resources, with Richard Hale's firm as the anchor investor. The final valuation, $16 billion. Claire Calloway, sole private owner, controlling interest for the next 50 years. The signing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, the same Friday that Jack Ashworth was hosting a 400-person dinner at the Grand Meridian Hotel to celebrate his success and introduce Megan Cross as the new woman at his side. Claire knew about the dinner. She had known for 2 weeks, ever since Patty had mentioned it within earshot, without realizing, or perhaps without caring, that Claire could hear. She could have signed the deal any day that week. Frank had offered Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday would have worked, but Claire chose Friday. She chose 4:47 in the afternoon. She chose to walk from that signing table to that ballroom because she understood something that Nana Joe had taught her without ever putting it into words. Closure is not just for you. It is for the people who need to see it happen so they understand that the story they told themselves was wrong. The Grand Meridian Hotel in Atlanta was wearing its finest that Friday night. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across a ballroom built to hold 400 people, and that evening it held exactly that many. White linen on every table, the low murmur of a jazz quartet from the corner, glasses clinking, expensive cologne mixing with the smell of catered food that cost more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a week. Jack Ashworth stood near the podium in a navy suit that had been tailored specifically for this evening. Silver watch, practiced smile. The kind of posture that said, "I belong here," which was interesting because every brick of the foundation he was standing on had been laid by someone else's hands. Victoria sat at table 2, front of the room, pearl necklace, the serene expression of a woman who believed that tonight was the final chapter of a 3-year project that had gone exactly according to plan. Tom was at table 3 with his wife, leaning back in his chair, with the comfort of a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be comfortable. Patty was already recording on her phone, getting footage for something she would post later for people who were not in the room to see. Megan Cross was in a gold dress, standing next to Jack, holding his arm in a way that was less about affection and more about possession, the way a person holds something they have recently acquired and want everyone to know belongs to them now. And Claire was at table 12, near the back, near the exit, close enough to say she was there, far enough to say she did not matter. She wore a deep burgundy gown, simple, no jewelry except the thin gold bracelet on her left wrist, worn smooth from 60 years of being worn by 2 women who understood that some things are more valuable because of what they carry than because of what they cost. She was still. The way deep water is still, calm on the surface, moving in ways you could not see. At 9 p.m. sharp, Jack took the podium. He thanked his investors. He thanked his legal team. He thanked the city of Atlanta. He thanked God. He thanked his barber, which got the polite laugh he was looking for. He thanked everyone whose name he could place with a benefit attached to it. He did not say Claire's name, not once, not even as a footnote. Then he tapped the microphone twice. The feedback cut through the room, a small, sharp sound that pulled every eye to the front. He smiled the way a man smiles when he is about to do something he has been rehearsing in his bathroom mirror for a week, and he pulled Megan forward and said it. "I want everyone tonight to meet the real lady of this house, the woman who has been by my side through all of this, the woman who deserves to be standing here." Applause, camera flashes, people rising from their seats, Victoria clapping the loudest, turning her head slowly toward table 12, finding Claire's face, holding it for a moment, then looking away like she was looking at a piece of furniture she had already arranged to have removed. Tom leaned over to his wife and whispered something. They both laughed. Patty pointed her phone at Megan and pressed record. Megan took the microphone. She thanked Jack. She thanked Victoria, who waved from her seat. She thanked Tom and Patty by name. And then, with a smile that she aimed like a weapon toward the back of the room, she said, "And to anyone here tonight who thought this moment would never come, it came." She did not say Claire's name. She did not need to. Guests turned toward table 12, some confused, some embarrassed, some smirking. Claire did not stand, did not flinch. She reached into her purse slowly, and her fingers found the folded contract. Thick cream-colored paper, the kind that lawyers use when the weight of what is written inside requires something that feels permanent. She touched it once, then she folded her hands back on the table and waited. Because Claire knew something that nobody else in that room knew yet. In approximately 4 minutes, the back doors were going to open, and the story everyone in this room believed they were living inside was going to change completely. At 9:15 p.m., the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. A man walked in who had not been there earlier. Richard Hale, 70 years old, silver-haired, dark suit, the quiet authority of someone who had been in boardrooms for so long that they had become his natural habitat. He was late because he had been on a call that ran long, A call about a deal that had just closed that afternoon at 4:47 p.m., a deal whose lead name he now saw sitting at a table near the back of this room. Richard walked through the ballroom without stopping at the main table, without shaking Jack's hand, without acknowledging the podium or the applause, or the woman in the gold dress. He walked directly, with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew exactly where the most important person in this room was sitting, and he stopped at table 12. He extended his hand and spoke loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear every word. Ms. Calloway, congratulations. What you accomplished today is the single most significant private oil acquisition this country has seen in 20 years. You have our full respect and our full partnership moving forward. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, the way a man sits beside someone important, because that is exactly what he was doing. The silence started at the tables closest to table 12 and spread outward through the room like ripples moving across the surface of still water. Conversations dropped, glasses stopped clinking, heads turned one by one, until 400 people were trying to understand what they had just heard and what it meant about everything they had witnessed in the preceding 2 hours. Jack looked up from the main table. His smile was still on his face, but it was no longer connected to anything. It was just sitting there, unattached, like a decoration that someone had forgotten to take down after the party was over. Victoria's clapping stopped mid-motion. Her hands stayed together, but the sound stopped coming, and her expression shifted into something that had no name and no category, because Victoria Ashworth had spent her entire life making sure she was never in a room where she did not already know the ending. She had not known this ending. Richard leaned close to Claire and said, "We will need you at the front for the formal announcement. The photographers will want you front and center." He said it the way things are said when they are not a question. Claire stood. She rose slowly, smoothed the front of the burgundy gown, touched the bracelet one time. One quiet, private moment that belonged only to her and Nana Joe, and the kitchen table and the envelope and the shoes and the promise. She did not look at Jack, did not look at Megan, did not look at Victoria. She turned and walked toward the front of the room beside Richard, and the crowd parted for her, the way crowds part when they prefer suddenly uncertain about who the most important person in the room actually is. Richard took the microphone. He was not a man who needed to perform authority. He simply had it, the way certain mountains simply have height. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption to this evening's program, but we have the privilege tonight of being in the presence of someone who, as of this afternoon at 4:47 p.m., became the controlling private owner of the Meridian Gulf oil field, a $16 billion acquisition that will reshape the energy landscape of this country for the next 50 years. Her name is Claire Calloway, and she has been in this room all evening. He gestured to her, stepped back. The room sat with it for a moment, the way a room sits with information that requires the complete dismantling and rebuilding of every assumption that was operating inside it 5 seconds ago. Then the applause came, confused at first, then building, then erupting in waves as 400 people recalculated everything they had witnessed and arrived one by one at the same understanding. Megan's hand slipped from Jack's arm slowly, like water running off something it could no longer hold on to. The gold dress suddenly looked like a costume rather than a statement. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out because there was nothing to say that would be adequate to the distance between where she thought she was standing and where she actually was. Tom leaned forward in his chair. His expression shifted from comfortable to something he had never worn before. and did not know how to adjust. Patty's phone was still recording, but her face had gone uncertain. She was no longer sure she wanted the footage she was gathering. And Jack. Jack stood at the front of the room with the color leaving his face, the way daylight leaves a room in late afternoon, gradually, and then all at once. His eyes found Claire across the ballroom, really found her, saw her the way you see someone when all the noise you have been making finally stops and the silence shows you what was standing there the whole time. The woman he had erased from the website, the woman he had seated at the back table, the woman whose name he had not mentioned once in a speech that lasted 12 minutes. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Claire took the microphone from Richard. She held it lightly. The way a person holds something when they do not need it, to feel powerful, but will use it because what they have to say deserves to be heard. She looked out at the room. 400 faces. Some she knew, some she did not. All of them looking at her now the way they should have been, looking at her all along. She said, "My grandmother told me to buy something with my name on it, something nobody could take from me. Not a man, not a family, not a company." She paused. I took my time, but I got it done. She set the microphone down on the podium. She turned and looked at Jack. One time, one moment, one look that carried everything she had decided not to say. Not rage, not satisfaction, not grief. Just the quiet, permanent finality of a woman who had already moved on and was only here to close the door. Then she turned away and walked toward the exit, and nobody said a word. There is a particular kind of silence that happens in a room when 400 people simultaneously realize they have been wrong about something. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is heavier than that. It is the silence of people who had opinions and voices 2 minutes ago and now have neither. The ballroom held that silence the way a held breath is held, tightly, uncomfortably, with the knowledge that it will have to be released at some point, and that the release is going to cost something. Someone in the media section was already typing. Someone else was already making a call. The story that would run in the morning had already changed completely, and every journalist in that room knew it. Darla was waiting in the parking garage, leaning against Claire's car, with her arms crossed and her phone in her hand, because Claire had texted her 1 hour earlier with the address and the words, "I might need a ride home, depending on how dramatic my exit is." Darla saw Claire walking toward her across the concrete, burgundy gown and gold bracelet, and the expression of a woman who had just detonated something enormous and walked away without looking at the explosion. "So," Darla said, "scale of 1 to 10, how dramatic was the exit?" Claire opened the car door. "I would say about a 16 billion. Darla stared at her. Then her face split into the biggest grin Claire had ever seen on another human being. "Get in the car," Darla said. "You are telling me everything. And we are stopping for pancakes on the way home, because you cannot drop a number like that on me and not buy me pancakes." They drove away from the Grand Meridian Hotel at 9:32 p.m. on a Friday night. 2 women in a car, one in a burgundy gown and one in jeans and a hospital badge she had forgotten to take off, heading toward a diner that was open until midnight, laughing the way women laugh when the worst is over and they know it. The press release dropped at 9 a.m. the next morning, exactly as scheduled. By noon, it was everywhere. Every major business publication, every energy network, every financial desk in the country. The name Claire Calloway attached to $16 billion and a Gulf Coast oil field and a deal that the industry had been watching build quietly for months, waiting to see whose name would be at the top when it finally closed. Alongside the deal, Through work Frank had been doing quietly for those same months, a forensic audit of Ashworth Energy became public. Irregularities documented with the kind of precision that only a 72-year-old petroleum attorney with a personal grudge against dishonesty could achieve. Client relationships that had been built on Claire's contacts, used without partnership agreements, business development work attributed to Jack that had originated entirely with his wife, revenue streams that existed only because of introductions Claire had made years ago. A civil case was filed within 2 weeks. Frank did not file it loudly. He filed it the way he did everything, precisely, quietly, with the confidence of a man who had been building towards something for a very long time and had no intention of missing. 3 of Jack's largest clients, men he had toasted at that dinner, men who had shaken his hand and told him he was going places, reached out the following week requesting meetings, not with Jack, with Claire. They had seen the press release. They had seen Richard Hale standing beside her. They had done the math that men in their position do quickly and without sentimentality, and they had arrived at the same conclusion. They had been doing business with the wrong partner for years. Within 60 days, Ashworth Energy lost both of its anchor contracts. The investors who had applauded Jack on Friday night stopped returning his calls by Monday afternoon. The company that had been built on Claire's framework, her contacts, her credibility, her years of work, began to lean the moment she stepped out from beneath it. He had built a house on her foundation and told everyone he was the architect. When she left, the whole thing leaned, and then it fell. Jack did not handle the collapse with grace. He called his lawyers the weekend the press release dropped and tried to assert a financial claim on the Meridian Gulf deal through the marriage. Frank had anticipated this move 2 years ago. The legal framework he had built around Claire's interests was designed specifically to withstand exactly this kind of challenge. The claim went nowhere. It did not even make it to a hearing. Megan was gone before the month was out. She had been drawn to what Jack appeared to be, his access, his position, the image of a man in an expensive suit standing at the front of a room full of other men in expensive suits. When the image collapsed, her interest collapsed with it. She was seen 6 weeks later at an industry event on the other side of town, smiling on the arm of a different executive, wearing a different dress, performing the same performance for a new audience. She had never loved Jack. She had loved what she thought he was. And what she thought he was had turned out to belong to someone else entirely. Victoria called 4 times. The first 3, Claire let it go to voicemail. On the 4th call, she answered. She held the phone and let Victoria speak. Let her apologize, explain, justify, revise, soften. Let her use the warm version of her voice, the one she used when she needed something, the one that said things like, "You are still family, and I always cared about you." Claire listened to all of it without interrupting. When Victoria was finished, Claire said quietly, with no heat and no cruelty, "Victoria, you sat at the front table the night your son erased me from a room I helped build. You clapped the loudest. We do not have anything left to say to each other." She hung up. She did not block the number. She simply never answered again. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to people who dismissed you is to stop being available to them entirely. Not in anger, not in revenge. Just in the quiet, devastating clarity of someone who has decided that you no longer have access to their time. The video Patty had recorded at the dinner made its way online, the way things do. Megan at the podium. Jack's announcement, the family clapping, but the context had completely reversed. People watching now understood what they were seeing. A husband crowning another woman in a room his wife had built. The family's cheerful participation documented in high definition for the entire internet to evaluate. Patty deleted her social media accounts within a week. Tom's business deal, the one he had been building with a former Ashworth Energy client, was quietly redirected to Claire's new venture. Nobody explained why. Nobody needed to. And here's the final thing I want to tell you, and I have been saving it because it is the most important part. 6 months after the dinner, Claire was in Birmingham. Not in Nana Joe's house, that was gone, sold after her grandmother passed. Standing now as someone else's home in someone else's story, but Claire had bought a piece of land nearby. 2 acres of red clay earth facing east with the kind of morning light that makes you feel like you are being offered something before the day has had time to take anything away. She was having a house built on it. A real house, not large, not showy, but hers, completely, with her name on every piece of paper and a porch that faced the sunrise. She sat on the porch frame on a Saturday morning, not yet a porch, just wooden beams and promise and open sky. Cup of coffee in both hands, no phone, no meeting, no one waiting on her signature. Just the sound of birds and construction and the kind of silence that comes after you have put down something heavy that you carried for a very long time and your shoulders finally remember what it feels like to be light. Darla called, because Darla always called. So, Darla said, "How is the house coming?" "Slowly, but it is coming. You know what? I think slow is fine. You have earned slow." Claire smiled. She looked out at the red earth and the morning light and the wooden frame of something that was being built properly, the way things are built when nobody is in a hurry and nobody is pretending. "Darla," she said. "Yeah, thank you. For the parking garage, for the pancakes, for the 7-year-old at the Thanksgiving table, for all of it." Darla was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for Darla. "Claire," she said, "you would have done all of that without me. You had a plan. You had Frank, you had the bracelet and the survey, and the whole $16 billion situation. You did not need me for any of it. I did not need you for the plan," Claire said. "I needed you for the getting through it. There is a difference." Darla was quiet again. Then she said, "Okay, fine. Now I am crying. Are you happy? I am a grown woman crying on a Tuesday morning. It is Saturday. Whatever." "The crying does not know what day it is," Claire laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from being loved by someone who has seen you at your worst and decided to stay anyway. The kind of laugh she had first learned in a kitchen in Tennessee, sitting across from a woman with a thin gold bracelet and a lifetime of tips saved in an envelope. She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, touched it one more time, the way she always did, not for luck and not for comfort, but for memory, for the woman who gave it to her and the promise it represented, and the granddaughter who had kept that promise in the most spectacular way either of them could have imagined. Nana Joe had said, "Buy something with your name on it, something nobody can take from you." Claire had bought a $16 billion oil field and a piece of land in Birmingham, and a morning where she did not have to answer to anyone. But the most valuable thing she owned, the thing that had carried her through every moment of this story, from the kitchen table to the driveway to the ballroom to the porch frame where she sat, now watching the sun come up over red clay earth, was the bracelet. Not because of what it was made of, but because of who gave it to her and why. And the voice that still echoed every time she touched it, clear as the day it was first spoken. When the world tries to tell you who you are, you look at this and remember who told you first. Closing disclaimer: this content was fully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real-life lessons. Every character is fictional. Every word was carefully crafted to entertain, inspire, and remind you that your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see it. Thank you for watching until the end. We will see you in the next story.